Now to an Eyewitness News investigation into what's essentially becoming homeless encampments on wheels. So-called van lords are renting out RVs to people who are now using them as their permanent residence.
In 2026, living in an RV could become illegal in more American cities than ever before. Not because homelessness was solved, but because laws, enforcement budgets, and court rulings quietly changed. This isn't a theory. It's already happening, and the countdown has started. The year 2026 represents a critical convergence point where multiple enforcement timelines collide simultaneously. City ordinances, state mandates, federal funding requirements, and enforcement budgets are aligning toward stricter vehicle habitation control across the nation. Since 2020, over 150 U.S. cities have rewritten or proposed updates to parking, camping, and vehicle use laws, with most taking full effect between 2025 and 2026. Federal compliance drives much of this change. Cities receiving infrastructure, housing, or transportation grants must demonstrate public safety and right-of-way access standards. RV encampments increasingly violate these requirements. When compliance deadlines arrive, enforcement inevitably follows. Insurance and liability concerns accelerate the shift. Municipal risk assessments now classify long-term vehicle habitation as significant legal exposure. As lawsuits over fires, sanitation failures, and emergency access multiply, cities respond by tightening regulations rather than expanding services or support. At state levels, legislatures are redefining what qualifies as habitable vehicles. Narrower definitions eliminate protections RV dwellers previously relied upon. Once these definitions change, enforcement becomes legally permissible even without alternative housing options available. By 2026, temporary tolerance policies expire in dozens of cities. What replaces them are permanent enforcement codes with dedicated funding. The turning point isn't ideological or political, it's purely administrative. When laws update, budgets lock in, and compliance deadlines hit, RV homelessness transitions from tolerated to prohibited. The shift represents the moment when municipal systems stop accommodating vehicle dwelling entirely. For years, cities faced legal limitations on aggressively enforcing homelessness laws. Recent court decisions across multiple jurisdictions fundamentally changed that landscape. Courts clarified that municipalities may regulate sleeping, camping, or residing in vehicles, provided laws are written neutrally and tied to public space use rather than housing status. This distinction proves critically important. Instead of banning homelessness directly, cities now regulate specific behaviors: overnight occupancy, cooking activities, waste dumping, or remaining parked beyond posted time limits. These regulations apply regardless of housing status, making enforcement legally defensible against constitutional challenges. By 2024, legal reviews revealed that cities issuing citations under parking or vehicle codes faced 40 to 50% fewer successful lawsuits than those enforcing blanket homelessness bans. Consequently, enforcement strategies shifted rather than softened. Cities simply reframed their approach. The numbers reflect this change dramatically. Cities that reclassified RV habitation under parking enforcement increased citations by 30 to 60% within 2 years, while legal challenges declined proportionally. This shift gives municipalities confidence to expand enforcement aggressively. By 2026, most major metropolitan areas will rely primarily on vehicle code enforcement rather than homelessness statutes, making RV living legally risky even without explicit bans on dwelling in vehicles. The legal system didn't outlaw RV living directly. Instead, it made vehicle dwelling enforceable indirectly through existing municipal codes. And that distinction fundamentally changes everything for hundreds of thousands of people living in RVs nationwide. Anti-camping ordinances were originally written to address tent encampments and sidewalk dwelling. Over time, municipalities systematically broadened these definitions without significant public attention or debate. Terms like sleeping, lodging, habitation, and overnight occupancy were quietly added to existing codes. Once definitions expanded, RVs automatically fell under identical categories as tents and makeshift shelters. If a vehicle is used for sleeping, cooking, or storing personal belongings overnight, it legally qualifies as a campsite under revised municipal codes. By 2023, comprehensive audits revealed that over 60% of major U.S. cities had adopted language broad enough to include RVs under anti-camping regulations. Many residents didn't realize this legal reclassification until enforcement actions began appearing in their neighborhoods. This legal framing allows cities to bypass previous shelter availability requirements entirely. Municipalities are no longer required to prove adequate shelter access if violations are classified as illegal camping rather than homelessness. The distinction removes a significant barrier to enforcement. The expansion proves subtle, yet profoundly powerful. It transforms everyday survival activities into legal violations. Cooking inside an RV, sleeping overnight in a parked vehicle, or remaining stationary too long becomes prohibited behavior rather than a housing crisis issue. By 2026, most enforcement actions will not mention homelessness at all. Citations and removal orders will be framed exclusively as camping violations, even when the campsite has wheels, an engine, and valid registration. This semantic shift eliminates legal protections that previously limited municipal enforcement authority against people living in RVs. Parking regulations represent the fastest and legally safest enforcement tool municipalities possess. They're administrative in nature, carry minimal legal risk, and operate through already funded departments. Since 2021, cities increasingly target parking code revisions rather than controversial homelessness policies that generate public debate. Common regulatory changes include reducing overnight parking hours from 8 to 4 hours, limiting consecutive stays to 24 to 72 hours, enforcing strict curb clearance requirements, and adding vehicle length caps of 20 to 24 feet. These rules don't explicitly mention RVs, but they affect them disproportionately compared to standard passenger vehicles. Municipal budget data reveals parking-related enforcement spending rising 20 to 40%, while homelessness service budgets stagnate or decline. Parking enforcement generates substantial revenue through citations and towing contracts, making it financially attractive to cash-strapped city governments. Public pressure accelerates these changes. Complaints from neighborhood residents, business associations, and tourism boards drive rapid policy updates. Parking laws can be rewritten and implemented within 3 to 6 months, while housing solutions require years of planning and funding. By tightening parking regulations now, cities prepare comprehensive enforcement infrastructure for 2026 without generating significant public controversy or legal challenges. Enforcement becomes routine administrative procedure rather than emergency-based response. Parking law reform represents how municipalities normalize RV removal, quietly, legally, and efficiently. The approach avoids political debates about homelessness while achieving identical outcomes through technical code enforcement that appears neutral on its surface but eliminates vehicle dwelling systematically. One of the most effective tools cities employ to restrict RV living involves vehicle size regulations. By redefining which vehicles may legally park on public streets, municipalities eliminate RVs without mentioning habitation whatsoever. The approach appears completely neutral while achieving targeted results. Common regulatory thresholds include 22 feet, 24 feet, or weight limits exceeding standard passenger vehicles by 1,000 to 2,000 pounds. Once adopted, these restrictions instantly make most RVs illegal to park overnight anywhere except specifically designated zones, which often don't exist. Between 2019 and 2024, cities implementing length-based restrictions documented RV presence dropping 50 to 70%. However, this wasn't because people found housing solutions. They were forced into constant movement or pushed completely out of the area into neighboring jurisdictions. These regulations prove extremely difficult to challenge legally. Cities frame them as essential safety measures addressing visibility concerns, emergency vehicle access, and road surface wear. Courts routinely uphold such ordinances against constitutional challenges, giving municipalities confidence to expand their use. By 2026, 200 to 300 additional cities will likely adopt size-based parking rules because they're simple to implement, straightforward to enforce, and legally resilient against court challenges. For RV dwellers, these regulations remove any remaining ambiguity about legal parking. Vehicle size alone makes parking prohibited regardless of behavior or compliance attempts. This represents how RV homelessness becomes functionally illegal, not through one sweeping law, but through dozens of small, seemingly reasonable regulations that collectively leave no legal place to exist anywhere within city limits. Even as RV homelessness grows dramatically, legal parking capacity shrinks simultaneously. This fundamental imbalance explains why RV living becomes legally impossible. Since 2020, dozens of major cities removed thousands of curbside parking spaces through bike lane installations, bus-only corridors, outdoor dining expansions, and street redesign projects. Transportation departments report urban curb space declining 15 to 30% in dense cities over just 5 years. RVs, requiring longer stretches of flat, unobstructed space, face elimination first. Passenger vehicles adapt by using garages or compact spaces. RVs cannot. Simultaneously, population pressure intensifies. RV registrations for full-time dwelling increased 40 to 60% during recent housing displacement periods, while cities designated zero replacement parking spaces. The widening gap creates an impossible situation, exponentially more vehicles competing for dramatically fewer legal spaces. This imbalance creates constant violation risk, even for compliant RV dwellers actively trying to follow all regulations. A parking space that remained legal last year may become prohibited today through restriping projects or updated signage, often without advance notice to residents. By 2026, many cities will reach a breaking point where legal RV parking technically exists on paper, but not in practical, usable reality. When compliance becomes mathematically impossible due to space scarcity, enforcement becomes inevitable regardless of individual behavior or intent. The crisis isn't just about regulations becoming stricter. It's about legal parking disappearing entirely while vehicle-dwelling populations grow, creating an enforcement environment where violations become unavoidable even for those desperately attempting compliance. Enforcement doesn't begin with vehicle removal. It starts with escalating citations that create inescapable financial traps. Parking tickets for oversized vehicles or overnight occupancy typically range from $50 to $250 per incident. For people living paycheck to paycheck, repeat violations accumulate devastating costs rapidly. Many cities implement escalating fine structures. 3 citations within 30 to 60 days can exceed $1,000. For displaced individuals already struggling financially, paying fines competes directly with fuel costs, food expenses, and essential vehicle repairs. Non-payment triggers late fees adding 25 to 50%, registration holds, or arrest warrants. Once vehicle registration lapses, RVs become subject to immediate towing without additional notice. This represents where enforcement shifts from administrative inconvenience to catastrophic loss. The process operates legally, executes quickly, and proves nearly impossible to stop once initiated. The trap operates through simple mathematics. A person earning $2,000 to $2,500 monthly cannot absorb repeated $150 to $200 citations without falling behind on other essential expenses. Enforcement systems assume compliance remains possible, but shrinking legal parking options make violations completely unavoidable. By 2026, cities increasingly budget enforcement operations under self-funding models where citation revenue directly supports expanded towing contracts and cleanup operations. This creates institutional incentives to enforce aggressively rather than resolve underlying housing issues. Fines don't deter RV homelessness or encourage compliance. Instead, they accelerate financial collapse for people already operating at survival margins, pushing them from marginal stability into complete crisis within weeks or months of initial citations. Vehicle impoundment represents the moment RV homelessness becomes absolute and irreversible. When an RV is towed to impound, a person simultaneously loses shelter, transportation capability, and virtually all personal property. Recovery fees typically exceed $1,500 to $3,000 initially, then increase $50 to $150 daily, with accumulating storage costs. Most impounded RVs are never recovered by their owners. People simply cannot afford release fees that quickly surpass the vehicle's actual value. Vehicles get auctioned to salvage buyers or destroyed entirely. This process functionally mirrors formal eviction, but without tenant protections, mandatory notice periods, or legal defense opportunities. Cities increasingly deploy towing as their primary enforcement tool because it permanently resolves neighborhood visibility complaints. Once the vehicle disappears from that block, the immediate problem vanishes from community view, regardless of what happens to the displaced person afterward. From 2021 to 2024, cities that expanded towing authority reported 40 to 60% drops in RV presence within target neighborhoods. However, these same cities documented corresponding 30 to 50% increases in unsheltered street homelessness during identical timeframes. By 2026, impoundment will function as enforcement finality across hundreds of cities. Once towed, RV dwellers lose their last protective buffer between marginal housing and complete street homelessness. The process operates as one-way displacement. People don't recover their vehicles and return to stable situations. They lose everything and join street homeless populations immediately. Towing isn't enforcement. It's systematic displacement without the legal protections that govern traditional housing evictions. Historically, enforcement faced limitations when shelter capacity was demonstrably full. That protection is rapidly eroding nationwide. Cities now separate shelter availability from parking enforcement by reclassifying violations as vehicle code issues rather than homelessness-related offenses requiring alternative housing options. Shelter capacity remains dramatically inadequate across the country. Nationwide, available beds cover only 30 to 40% of displaced populations during typical conditions. Yet enforcement proceeds regardless of these capacity shortages. For RV dwellers specifically, shelters prove incompatible with their actual circumstances. Many facilities prohibit families from staying together, don't allow pets, or require surrendering personal possessions. Accepting shelter often means abandoning the RV entirely and losing essential employment access that depends on vehicle mobility. Legally, cities no longer need offering shelter availability before issuing parking citations or authorizing towing for vehicle code violations. This removes a major barrier that previously limited aggressive enforcement during winter months or crisis periods. By 2026, shelter scarcity will no longer slow or prevent RV enforcement actions across most major cities. The legal connection between shelter access and enforcement authority has been systematically severed through strategic code reclassification. Courts now routinely uphold enforcement even when shelter beds remain unavailable, provided the violations are framed as parking or vehicle code issues rather than criminalizing homelessness directly. This distinction allows cities to proceed with removal operations while avoiding constitutional challenges about cruel and unusual punishment. Shelter availability once protected RV dwellers from displacement. That protection has largely disappeared through administrative reclassification rather than increased shelter capacity. Beyond parking regulations, paperwork-based enforcement expands rapidly as cities coordinate with DMV databases, insurance verification systems, and code enforcement departments to identify non-compliant vehicles for immediate action. Expired registration, lapsed insurance coverage, failed emissions testing, or safety inspection violations trigger automatic citations or immediate vehicle removal. Many RV dwellers struggle maintaining compliance due to costs ranging from $500 to $1,500 annually, or mobility limitations preventing regular renewal. Insurance premiums for older RVs have risen 20 to 40% in recent years as carriers reassess risk profiles. Some insurers now refuse offering full-time dwelling coverage altogether. Without valid insurance, vehicles become illegal to operate or park on public streets, creating instant violation status. Registration renewal presents similar barriers. Fees for RVs typically run $200 to $600 annually depending on state and vehicle size. When combined with required insurance, emissions testing costing $50 to $100, and safety inspections adding another $100 to $200, total compliance costs exceed $1,000 to $2,000 yearly. Paperwork enforcement proves highly effective because it operates as binary determination. Either a vehicle maintains full compliance or it doesn't. There's no discretionary middle ground or grace period for financial hardship. By 2026, this enforcement layer will quietly eliminate tens of thousands of RVs from city streets without ever mentioning homelessness or displacement. Vehicles simply become illegal due to paperwork lapses, then face immediate towing. Administrative enforcement through documentation requirements achieves identical outcomes to explicit homelessness bans while appearing completely neutral and avoiding constitutional challenges entirely. Enforcement rarely affects populations equally or simultaneously. The first groups experiencing devastating impacts will be those least able to adapt. Seniors living on fixed incomes of $1,000 to $1,500 monthly, families with school-aged children, disabled individuals requiring medical equipment, and veterans managing chronic health conditions. Older RVs, typically 15 to 25 years old, are more likely failing safety inspections or emissions testing. Fixed retirement incomes cannot absorb sudden fines of $200 to $500 or insurance premium increases of 30 to 50%. Families cannot rotate parking locations endlessly without severely disrupting children's school attendance and parents' employment stability. These vulnerable groups also avoid traditional shelter systems due to legitimate safety concerns, health complications requiring privacy, or family separation policies that split parents from children. When enforcement escalates, they possess fewer fallback options than younger, single, able-bodied individuals. Data from cities that already implemented aggressive enforcement shows seniors and families displaced 6 to 12 months before broader populations experience similar impacts. By the time public attention focuses on the crisis, the most vulnerable have already been systematically removed. This pattern reveals how RV homelessness becomes functionally illegal in practice, not through simultaneous mass displacement, but by progressively removing the ability of the most fragile populations to remain legally present anywhere within city boundaries. Enforcement targets those least equipped to fight back legally, relocate quickly, or generate public sympathy through organized resistance. They disappear quietly before anyone notices the pattern developing systematically. RV parks are frequently suggested as obvious solutions, but basic mathematics make that completely impossible. The United States has approximately 16,000 RV parks total, with many being seasonal operations, privately owned facilities, or designed exclusively for short-term recreational use. Only 4,000 to 5,000 allow long-term residency at all. Capacity represents the fundamental problem. Even if every park opened gates to displaced people, available spaces couldn't accommodate 200,000 to 300,000 displaced RV dwellers nationwide. Vacancy rates in high-demand states like California, Oregon, and Washington sit near 0%, with waiting lists stretching 12 to 24 months. Cost creates another insurmountable barrier. Monthly rates that once averaged $400 to $600 now routinely exceed $1,000 to $2,500, often excluding electricity, costing $100 to $200, water, and sewer connections. For someone earning $15 to $20 hourly, that consumes 50 to 60% of gross income before taxes. Zoning regulations block expansion entirely. New RV park proposals face intense opposition from neighboring residents and planning boards. Consequently, total supply remains essentially flat, while demand explodes by 40 to 60% annually in crisis regions. RV parks were built for recreational travelers, not as permanent housing infrastructure. They cannot scale remotely fast enough to absorb a nationwide housing collapse affecting hundreds of thousands of people. Suggesting RV parks as solutions ignores mathematical reality. There simply aren't enough spaces, and expansion faces insurmountable political and financial obstacles in communities nationwide. As enforcement intensifies, displaced RV dwellers won't disappear. They'll relocate to neighboring jurisdictions, creating cascading interstate pressure. States with stricter enforcement laws effectively push RV populations into adjacent regions, overwhelming smaller cities and rural areas lacking infrastructure or resources to respond. This migration pattern is already measurable through vehicle registration data. Regions with lenient enforcement policies experience sudden spikes of 200 to 400% in vehicle habitation after nearby cities implement aggressive crackdowns. Local governments respond predictably by tightening their own laws within 6 to 12 months, creating devastating domino effects. The result transforms a local problem into a national crisis. RV homelessness becomes a moving emergency, bouncing between jurisdictions without any resolution. Displaced people exhaust savings constantly relocating every 30 to 90 days while searching for remaining tolerance zones. By 2026, more states will coordinate enforcement strategies specifically designed to close escape routes between cities. Interstate compacts and information sharing agreements will eliminate geographic flexibility, one of the last survival tools available to RV dwellers. Recent examples show this coordination emerging. When 5 to 7 cities in a metropolitan region simultaneously tighten regulations, displaced populations have nowhere to relocate within 50 to 100 miles. They're forced into constant motion across state lines or pushed into complete street homelessness. Migration doesn't solve homelessness, it redistributes displacement until no jurisdiction remains willing or able to absorb incoming populations. The crisis becomes permanent, mobile, and nationwide rather than locally manageable through any policy intervention. Making RV living illegal doesn't eliminate homelessness. It transforms its visible form dramatically. When RVs are removed through towing, escalating fines, or comprehensive parking bans, displaced people don't transition into stable housing. They lose protective shelter first, then join street homeless populations immediately. Data from cities' increasing RV enforcement reveals consistent patterns. Vehicle removal is followed by 30 to 50% increases in unsheltered street homelessness, not declines. RVs provide critical insulation from weather, secure storage for possessions and documents, and essential mobility for employment access. Even under unstable conditions, they protect people from extreme temperatures, theft, and constant exposure to violence. Once an RV is impounded or forced from an area, those protections vanish instantly. People transition to sidewalks, tent encampments, or doorways, locations far more visible, dangerous, and expensive for cities to manage. This displacement increases municipal costs dramatically. Emergency room visits rise 40 to 60%. Police calls for disturbances increase 25 to 40%. Sanitation and cleanup budgets expand by hundreds of thousands of dollars. Cities spending $2,000 to $3,000 to tow one RV often spend $10,000 to $15,000 annually managing the resulting street homelessness. Ironically, enforcement aimed at cleaning up neighborhoods typically produces more visible homelessness. RV living functions as a critical buffer between housed life and street survival. Removing that buffer accelerates collapse into deeper crisis, rather than promoting stability or housing transitions. Criminalizing RV living doesn't solve anything. It removes the last protective layer before people hit the pavement completely. Homelessness caused by structural. Housing shortages cannot be solved through enforcement, because enforcement doesn't create housing units. The United States faces a deficit of 4 to 7 million affordable housing units, with construction timelines stretching 5 to 10 years behind accelerating demand. No amount of citations, towing operations, or arrests can close that fundamental gap. Every enforcement action treats homelessness as voluntary behavior rather than economic condition. But comprehensive data proves otherwise. When rent exceeds 50 to 60% of income, displacement becomes mathematically inevitable. When wages lag 30 to 40% behind housing costs, people fall out of the system regardless of compliance efforts or personal responsibility. Cities increasing enforcement often document temporary reductions in RV visibility, but never reductions in actual homelessness. Displaced populations are pushed elsewhere, forced into constant relocation, or driven into deeper instability in street living. Enforcement changes location and visibility, not underlying outcomes or housing status. A financial contradiction undermines enforcement strategies. Cities spend $50 to $100 million annually on enforcement, towing contracts, and cleanup operations, while affordable housing development remains chronically underfunded at 10 to 20% of necessary investment levels. The cycle consumes massive resources without addressing root causes. By 2026, enforcement-heavy strategies will reach practical limits. When every city within 100 to 200 miles tightens rules simultaneously, displacement has nowhere to go. At that point, homelessness becomes unavoidable and unmanageable rather than controlled through geographic shuffling. This crisis cannot be enforced away because it wasn't caused by rule breaking. It resulted from structural housing system failure requiring structural solutions. If current trends continue uninterrupted, 2026 will mark the moment RV homelessness shifts from tolerated to systematically criminalized across most of the nation. Not through one sweeping federal law, but through thousands of coordinated local regulations that collectively leave no legal place to exist anywhere. This critical moment will define whether the United States addresses housing collapse structurally through investment and construction, or manages displacement purely through punishment, enforcement, and geographic redistribution without resolution. Cities will spend billions on enforcement while homelessness continues growing 15 to 25% annually. The approach treats symptoms while ignoring causes, creating cycles of displacement costing 3 to 5 times more than permanent housing solutions while achieving worse outcomes for everyone involved. RV homelessness becoming functionally illegal nationwide won't end the crisis. It represents the point where displacement outpaces compassion entirely, and enforcement replaces problem-solving as default policy response across hundreds of jurisdictions simultaneously. What emerges after 2026 depends entirely on whether housing gets rebuilt at scale or whether basic survival itself remains classified as continuous violation requiring constant punishment and removal. The choice isn't between enforcement and chaos. It's between addressing housing failure structurally or managing human displacement through increasingly expensive, ineffective punishment systems that solve nothing while costing exponentially more than building actual housing. 2026 represents decision time. Invest in solutions or institutionalize punishment as permanent policy response to housing system collapse affecting millions of Americans nationwide.
Chicago just dropped new numbers on homelessness. Way more people out there than they thought.
Yeah, Brett Bagansky is live in Uptown with the latest data as the weather continues to be dangerously cold. Brett?
Chicago spends billions every year on housing programs. Politicians give speeches, budgets get approved, promises get made. But outside, people are still living in parking lots, still sleeping in vehicles, still choosing between heat and food. This is what system failure looks like in real life. And in 2026, it's getting worse. Between 2022 and 2026, Chicago experienced a dramatic increase in people living full-time in vehicles, vans, and aging RVs. Housing advocates estimate that vehicle homelessness in Cook County has surged by over 60% in just 4 years. What started as temporary shelter during layoffs and rent spikes has transformed into permanent survival for thousands of families. Many of these RVs are not modern motorhomes. They are decades-old campers, delivery vans converted with plywood beds, or minivans packed with belongings and makeshift sleeping areas. Recent housing surveys reveal that more than 40% of vehicle dwellers in Chicago were previously renters who lost housing after rent increases of 25 to 45% since 2021. Median rent for a one-bedroom apartment in many neighborhoods now exceeds $1,600 per month, while average wages in service and warehouse jobs remain under $22 per hour. This widening gap makes saving for security deposits nearly impossible. Public transit access once allowed low-income residents to live farther from the city center, but rising transportation costs and job instability have pushed people to park close to their workplaces instead. Industrial corridors, highway underpasses, and unused lots have quietly become survival zones where entire communities form. What makes this crisis different in 2026 is its permanence. Surveys show that over half of Chicago's vehicle residents have lived this way for more than 18 months. What was meant to be temporary shelter has become a lifestyle of last resort, with no clear path back to traditional housing for most families. Most RV homelessness in Chicago does not begin on the streets. It begins inside apartments. Between 2023 and 2025, Cook County recorded more than 180,000 eviction filings. Even when tenants avoid formal eviction, many leave under pressure from rent hikes, lease non-renewals, or building sales that force everyone out. Medical debt plays a major role in this displacement. Nearly 1 in 4 vehicle dwellers report losing housing after a health emergency. A single hospital stay can generate bills exceeding $15,000. Without savings, families fall behind on rent within months. Credit scores drop sharply. Future rental applications become impossible to pass. Layoffs have accelerated this process dramatically. Between 2024 and 2026, Illinois lost tens of thousands of logistics, retail, and manufacturing jobs. Many displaced workers moved into gig economy work with highly unstable income. Weekly earnings fluctuate wildly. Most landlords refuse to accept this kind of uncertainty when screening tenants. Security deposits have also surged to unprecedented levels. In many Chicago buildings, move-in costs now exceed $4,000. For people earning $40,000 per year, this represents more than 2 months of take-home pay after taxes. Once housing is lost, RVs become the final buffer between families and complete street homelessness. Vehicles allow people to stay near schools, hospitals, and jobs. But this buffer quickly turns into entrapment. Without stable addresses, it becomes harder to qualify for housing assistance, employment opportunities, and government benefits, effectively locking families into long-term displacement with no way out. Chicago winters are among the deadliest in America for unhoused people. Average January temperatures often fall below 20 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chills reaching negative 20 degrees or lower. For RV residents, this turns every night into a survival test that could prove fatal. Most vehicles are not insulated for brutal Midwest winters. Thin walls, cracked seals, and metal frames allow heat to escape rapidly. To stay warm, residents rely on propane heaters, electric space heaters, and makeshift stoves. These methods are extremely dangerous. Fire departments report dozens of RV-related winter fires each year, many caused by faulty wiring or tipped heaters that ignite bedding or clothing. Carbon monoxide poisoning is another major risk. Improper ventilation can turn a small heater into a deadly hazard within minutes. Local clinics report significant spikes in winter carbon monoxide exposure among vehicle dwellers, with some cases proving fatal before help arrives. Frozen plumbing is a constant problem. Water tanks crack under pressure, pipes burst overnight, toilets stop working entirely. Without expensive repairs, RVs become completely unlivable. Many residents resort to melting snow or buying bottled water, costing $40 to $70 per week. Fuel costs compound the crisis severely. Running engines overnight for warmth can cost over $300 per month in winter. With gas prices remaining volatile, many simply cannot afford consistent heat throughout the season. Medical data shows that hypothermia-related emergency visits among homeless individuals in Chicago rise by over 30% each winter. Every cold wave becomes a potential mass casualty event that strains hospital systems. Chicago's shelter system was never designed to support long-term mass homelessness on this scale. By 2026, it is operating far beyond capacity. City data shows that on most winter nights, emergency shelters run at over 95% occupancy, with hundreds turned away daily. Many shelters impose strict rules that exclude vulnerable populations. These include curfews, identification requirements, sobriety policies, and separation of couples. RV residents often avoid shelters because they cannot bring pets, partners, or personal belongings. For families with children, shelters may be located far from schools and jobs, creating impossible trade-offs between education and safety. Safety concerns are another major barrier. Reports of theft, assaults, and severe overcrowding are common. For people living in vehicles, shelters can feel more dangerous than parking quietly in familiar areas where they have established some routine. Wait lists for transitional housing now stretch 12 to 24 months in most cases. Housing vouchers face similar delays, with approval processes taking years. Even when finally approved, recipients struggle to find landlords willing to accept assistance vouchers in high-rent neighborhoods. Migrant shelter programs have further strained already limited resources. Since 2023, thousands of asylum seekers have entered Chicago's shelter network, competing for limited beds and funding. While both groups desperately need help, the system lacks adequate capacity for either population. As a result, many RV residents are effectively excluded from emergency services. Shelters technically exist, but they are not accessible in practice for most vehicle dwellers. The system functions primarily as overflow management, not as real housing solutions that create pathways to stability. In response to growing RV communities, Chicago has dramatically expanded parking enforcement and zoning restrictions. Dozens of neighborhoods now explicitly prohibit overnight vehicle dwelling. Violations can result in fines exceeding $250 per ticket with no payment plans available. For RV residents living on razor-thin budgets, tickets accumulate rapidly. Many report receiving 3 to 5 citations per month. Unpaid fines lead to vehicle booting, impoundment, and permanent loss of their only shelter from the elements. Towing is especially devastating for families. Impound fees can exceed $1,500 initially. Storage fees add $60 per day, while vehicles sit in lots. Most residents cannot possibly recover their vehicles under these terms. Once towed, homelessness becomes absolute and irreversible. City cleanup operations also displace entire RV clusters without warning. Without sufficient notice, residents are ordered to leave immediately, losing access to nearby clinics, outreach workers, and established employment routes they depend on. Officials justify enforcement actions under public safety and sanitation concerns. However, comprehensive studies show that forced displacement actually increases instability and worsens long-term health outcomes. People simply move to more hidden, unsafe locations where services cannot reach them. By 2026, advocacy groups estimate that over 30% of Chicago's vehicle homeless population has lost at least one vehicle to enforcement actions. Instead of reducing homelessness through these tactics, crackdowns actively deepen the crisis by removing the last barrier between poverty and complete street homelessness. Families lose everything they own overnight when vehicles are impounded and eventually sold at auction. For many RV residents in Chicago, daily life includes frequent contact with law enforcement. Parking complaints, welfare checks, noise reports, and anonymous tips regularly bring police to their doors. While some officers offer genuine assistance, many encounters result in citations, vehicle searches, or orders to immediately relocate. City records show that vehicle-related enforcement calls increased by more than 45% between 2022 and 2026. Most of these calls involve people simply living in their vehicles. Residents report being forced to move multiple times per week, severely disrupting sleep schedules, work routines, and medical appointments. Each interaction carries significant risk. Minor violations can escalate into arrests for unpaid fines or expired registrations that people cannot afford to renew. Once arrested, individuals may lose access to their vehicle entirely. Legal aid groups report that over 20% of vehicle dwellers currently have unresolved court cases linked to parking or traffic enforcement. Racial disparities also persist throughout the enforcement system. Available data indicates that Black and Latino residents are stopped and cited at significantly higher rates than white residents in similar situations. This pattern reinforces destructive cycles of debt and criminalization. Constant surveillance creates severe psychological strain. Many residents sleep lightly or not at all, fearing knocks at their windows during the night. Some avoid leaving their vehicles during daytime hours to reduce visibility and avoid attention. This isolation dramatically reduces access to outreach programs and essential health services. Instead of stabilizing housing situations, enforcement-driven policing often increases displacement, trauma, and deep distrust of institutions, making long-term recovery significantly harder for vulnerable families. Living in an RV without stable utilities creates severe and often life-threatening health risks. Many residents suffer from untreated chronic conditions such as diabetes, hypertension, asthma, and arthritis. Without reliable refrigeration, essential medications spoil within days. Without consistent electricity, critical medical devices like oxygen concentrators and sleep apnea machines cannot function properly. Mobile clinic data shows that over 60% of Chicago's vehicle homeless population lacks regular access to primary care physicians. Emergency rooms become the default healthcare provider for routine issues. This leads to delayed treatment for serious conditions and significantly higher mortality rates compared to housed populations. Winter months dramatically increase danger. Frostbite, pneumonia, and respiratory infections spike among vehicle residents exposed to extreme cold. Hospitals report seasonal increases of 25 to 35% in cold-related admissions among unhoused patients during Chicago's harsh winters. Mental health care is even harder to access than physical health services. Long waitlists and extremely limited mobile psychiatry services leave most people completely untreated. Substance use disorders often worsen in isolation without proper support systems. Infections spread easily in crowded, unsanitary conditions. Limited access to clean water and proper sanitation leads to skin infections, gastrointestinal illness, and severe dental disease. Untreated dental problems alone account for thousands of emergency room visits annually throughout Cook County. Medical debt compounds the existing crisis. Even insured residents face co-payments and uncovered services. A single emergency room visit can cost $2,000 or more. For people earning a regular income from gig work, this creates devastating long-term financial damage that prevents any chance of returning to stable housing. Contrary to widespread stereotypes, most RV residents in Chicago are actively employed. Recent surveys indicate that nearly 55% of vehicle dwellers hold jobs or perform regular gig work. These positions include warehouse workers, office cleaners, delivery drivers, security guards, home health aides, and caregivers for elderly clients. However, income remains highly unstable. Many earn between $1,800 and $2,600 per month, far below what is needed for market-rate housing in Chicago. With average rents exceeding $1,600, housing costs would consume over 70% of monthly income before any other expenses. Lack of permanent addresses creates multiple employment barriers. Job applications, background checks, and payroll systems often require stable housing addresses. Some workers use friends' addresses or post office boxes, risking immediate termination if the deception is discovered during verification. Maintaining basic hygiene also affects employment prospects. Without regular access to showers and laundry facilities, workers struggle to maintain professional appearance standards. Gym memberships and truck stop showers can cost $40 to $80 monthly, draining already limited funds needed for food and fuel. Transportation failures are devastatingly common. When vehicles break down, residents may miss work for weeks while unable to afford repairs. Average repair costs ranging from $1,200 to $3,000 are simply unaffordable for most families. Many people juggle multiple part-time jobs simultaneously to survive. This leads to extreme exhaustion and eventual burnout. Studies show that working homeless individuals experience significantly higher rates of workplace injury and clinical depression than both housed workers and unemployed homeless populations combined. A rapidly growing portion of Chicago's vehicle homeless population consists of older adults and families with children. By 2026, nearly 30% are over age 55. Many survive on fixed incomes under $1,400 per month from Social Security or disability payments. These payments no longer cover basic rent anywhere in Chicago. Even subsidized senior housing facilities have multi-year wait lists. After medical emergencies or spousal death, many elderly residents lose housing within months of the triggering event. Families face particularly unique and difficult challenges. Children living in vehicles struggle severely with school attendance, completing homework, and maintaining adequate nutrition. School districts report rising numbers of mobile students lacking stable residences who fall behind academically. Lack of privacy profoundly affects child development. Teenagers often drop out due to embarrassment about their living situations and chronic instability. Child welfare agencies sometimes intervene when conditions are discovered, creating serious risks of family separation. Healthcare needs are significantly higher for senior citizens. Mobility issues, heart disease, and medication dependency make vehicle living especially dangerous and potentially fatal. Yet nursing facilities remain financially unaffordable without Medicaid approval, which can take years. Many seniors previously owned homes outright. Foreclosure, property taxes, or overwhelming medical debt forced sales. Losing stable housing late in life is psychologically devastating and often impossible to recover from. This demographic shift proves conclusively that homelessness is no longer limited to young, single adults with substance abuse issues. It now affects entire life stages, from young children through retirement-age seniors, fundamentally changing the nature of America's housing crisis. Chicago's social service system is severely fragmented and completely overwhelmed. Housing assistance, food aid, healthcare, and employment services operate through separate agencies, with virtually no coordination. Applicants must navigate multiple bureaucracies simultaneously. Completing applications requires complex paperwork, attending multiple appointments, and maintaining consistent contact, all extremely difficult without phones, internet access, or reliable transportation. Nearly 40% of eligible vehicle dwellers fail to complete application processes despite genuine need. Housing vouchers remain extremely scarce. In 2025, fewer than 1 in 5 applicants received any assistance. Waiting lists often close entirely for years at a time, with no new applications accepted regardless of need. Caseworkers are severely overburdened across all agencies. Average caseloads exceed 75 clients per individual worker. This drastically limits meaningful follow-up and personalized support that could make real differences. Nonprofit organizations fill critical gaps but rely on unstable grant funding. Budgets fluctuate dramatically year to year, disrupting established programs. Outreach teams are constantly forced to prioritize immediate emergencies over effective prevention strategies. Many RV residents fall into frustrating service gaps. They earn slightly too much for emergency aid eligibility, but far too little for actual housing. This leaves them completely unsupported by any program. The result is a bureaucratic maze with no clear exits. People move endlessly between offices, shelters, and clinics without making any real progress toward stability. Instead of creating functional pathways out of homelessness, the system primarily manages decline. Program complexity actively discourages participation. Documentation requirements, appointment scheduling, and verification processes assume resources that homeless people simply do not have. The system designed to help actually creates additional barriers to accessing desperately needed assistance. Living in an RV without proper hookups creates constant and severe sanitation problems. Most vehicle residents in Chicago lack reliable access to running water, sewage disposal systems, and regular trash collection. Public restrooms are extremely limited, especially overnight. Many close by 8 p.m., leaving residents without facilities for 12 hours or more. Gym memberships, gas station restrooms, and truck stops become absolutely essential for basic hygiene. These services cost between $30 and $80 per month. When money inevitably runs out, hygiene rapidly collapses. Laundry becomes infrequent. Showers are skipped for days. Illness spreads more easily in these conditions. Public health departments report significantly higher rates of skin infections, lice, scabies, and gastrointestinal disease among vehicle dwellers compared to housed populations. Improper waste disposal also creates serious environmental hazards. Buckets, portable toilets, and improvised systems often leak or overflow onto the ground. Trash accumulation becomes highly visible to surrounding communities. Without regular pickup services, bags pile up around vehicles. This attracts rodents and insects. Complaints from nearby residents and businesses increase dramatically. Enforcement actions follow quickly. Entire communities are forcibly removed due to sanitation concerns. Clean water access is another critical issue. Many residents buy bottled water exclusively, spending $25 to $50 per week. Without access to clean water, safe food preparation becomes impossible. These degrading conditions severely damage dignity and mental health. Constant uncleanliness negatively affects employability and social interaction. Sanitation failures are not personal choices or moral failings. They are the direct and predictable result of systematic infrastructure exclusion from basic utilities. Chronic homelessness produces severe and lasting psychological damage. RV residents live under constant multiple threats, including eviction, towing, extreme cold, theft, and untreated illness. This prolonged stress leads to extremely high rates of depression, anxiety disorders, and post-traumatic stress conditions. Mental health clinics estimate that over 50% of Chicago's vehicle homeless population shows clear symptoms of major depressive disorder. Post-traumatic stress disorder is particularly common, especially among those previously evicted, abused, or displaced by aggressive enforcement actions. Sleep deprivation is a major contributing factor to mental decline. Noise, extreme cold, police visits, and constant safety fears prevent deep, restorative rest. Long-term sleep loss dramatically increases risk of heart disease, cognitive decline, and severe emotional instability. Social isolation worsens all symptoms significantly. Many residents deliberately avoid social contact to remain unnoticed by authorities. This reduces access to emotional support networks. Suicidal ideation is reported at significantly higher rates than in housed populations. Access to mental health care remains extremely limited. Public mental health systems have wait lists stretching months or even years. Private therapy is completely unaffordable for people in poverty. Medication access is inconsistent without stable addresses for prescription delivery. Substance use often becomes a coping behavior for unbearable conditions. Alcohol and drugs provide temporary relief from psychological pain, but deepen long-term dependency. Treatment programs are scarce and extremely difficult to access without stable housing as a prerequisite. Mental health collapse is not a primary cause of homelessness for most people. It is the direct consequence of prolonged instability, trauma, and systematic exclusion from basic human needs and dignity. Improvised living conditions create extreme and often deadly safety hazards. Most RVs currently used for homelessness were never designed for permanent winter occupancy. Electrical systems become dangerously overloaded. Propane tanks are poorly maintained or improperly stored. Wiring is frequently damaged by weather, rodents, or amateur repairs. Chicago Fire Department reports document dozens of vehicle-related fires annually, with concentrations during winter months. Common causes include space heaters left running overnight, candle use for lighting, faulty portable generators, and makeshift cooking stoves. Propane leaks are especially dangerous in enclosed spaces. Without proper ventilation systems, even small leaks can lead to catastrophic explosions. Carbon monoxide deaths remain a persistent and preventable risk. Even small leaks can prove fatal overnight while residents sleep. Fuel storage inside vehicles dramatically increases fire danger. Gasoline containers are often kept dangerously close to heaters or cooking equipment. One spark can destroy entire clusters of parked RVs within minutes. Theft and violence are additional constant threats. Isolated parking areas typically lack adequate lighting and any security. Presence. Break-ins are extremely common. Residents report losing identification documents, medications, and limited cash reserves. Severe weather adds multiple risks. Heavy snow accumulation can collapse aging roofs. Ice damages exhaust systems and creates carbon monoxide backup. Flooding damages electrical components and creates electrocution hazards. Emergency response is significantly slower in hidden locations where RV communities form. Fires spread quickly through clustered vehicles before help can arrive. Loss of one RV often means loss of absolutely everything a family owns. Safety failures are fundamentally structural problems. They stem directly from forcing people to survive in spaces never meant for long-term human habitation. RV homelessness in Chicago remains largely hidden from mainstream view. Many communities form in industrial zones, under highway overpasses, near rail yards, and along isolated riverbanks. These locations remain completely unseen by most city eye residents going about daily life. Individual clusters may contain 10 to 50 vehicles parked together. Over time, informal systems and social structures naturally develop. Residents share tools, food, and critical information about enforcement patterns. Some communities establish security rotations to watch for threats. Others coordinate trash removal to avoid attracting attention. These informal communities provide essential stability. People feel considerably safer in groups than living alone. Strong social bonds reduce isolation and help prevent violence. However, invisibility carries significant costs. Outreach workers struggle to locate residents who need services. Mobile healthcare teams miss patients entirely. Official data consistently undercounts vehicle homelessness by thousands of people. City surveys regularly underestimate actual populations by up to 40% or more. Without accurate numbers, funding allocations remain grossly inadequate for actual need. When communities are discovered by authorities, they are typically dismantled immediately. Evictions scatter residents across the city. Social networks collapse overnight. Support systems vanish completely. Invisibility protects people temporarily from enforcement, but prevents any long-term policy solutions. Out of sight consistently becomes out-of-policy priority for elected officials. These communities are not lawless zones or criminal encampments. They are survival neighborhoods created by systemic housing failure and the complete absence of affordable alternatives. Residents organize themselves as best they can within impossible circumstances, creating order from chaos. Every election cycle brings renewed pledges to finally end homelessness. City leaders announce new task forces, funding packages, and innovative pilot programs. Budgets increase on paper. Press conferences multiply with impressive announcements. Yet actual outcomes remain extremely poor. Between 2022 and 2026, Chicago spent billions of dollars on various housing and homelessness programs. Vehicle homelessness still rose sharply throughout this same period. Most funding flows to emergency response rather than permanent housing construction. Temporary shelters, increased policing, and cleanup operations consume large portions of allocated budgets without addressing root causes. Affordable housing production lags far behind actual demand. Only a small fraction of needed units are built annually. Zoning restrictions and organized community opposition slow projects for years. Voucher programs fail, primarily due to widespread landlord resistance. Many property owners refuse tenants with government assistance, citing perceived risk and administrative bureaucracy. Accountability for failed programs remains extremely limited. Comprehensive program evaluations are rare. Failed initiatives are simply rebranded with new names rather than fundamentally corrected. Residents gradually lose all trust in government. Institutions. After years of broken promises and unmet commitments, many stop seeking help entirely through official channels. The growing gap between political rhetoric and lived reality actively undermines reform efforts. Without fundamental structural change, announcements increasingly become substitutes for actual solutions. Homelessness has become a political talking point rather than a crisis requiring urgent action. Leaders campaign on compassion, but govern with enforcement. Until housing is treated as essential infrastructure rather than a market commodity, the crisis will continue to deepen regardless of promises made. If current trends continue unchecked, Chicago's RV homelessness will significantly worsen. Rising interest rates, insurance costs, and utility prices are steadily increasing housing instability across all income levels. Economic analysts project further rent growth of 6 to 9% annually over the next several years. Wages are extremely unlikely to match this pace. Eviction filings may rise again to record levels. Climate volatility will intensify existing risks. More frequent extreme cold events and severe storms will increase winter deaths and displacement. Infrastructure failures during emergencies will disproportionately harm vehicle dwellers. Parking enforcement is expected to expand further. More restricted zones and aggressive towing initiatives are already planned. This will push residents into increasingly risky and isolated areas. Healthcare systems will face dramatically higher uncompensated care costs. Emergency rooms will remain perpetually overloaded with preventable conditions. Children currently growing up in vehicles may face severe long-term educational setbacks. Seniors may be forced into institutional care prematurely due to health decline. Without major public investment in deeply affordable housing, effective prevention programs, and integrated support services, this crisis becomes permanently embedded in Chicago's social fabric. Chicago's RV homelessness is not a temporary anomaly or economic blip. It is a structural outcome of deliberate economic and policy failure over decades. What happens next depends entirely on whether housing is finally treated as essential infrastructure that everyone deserves, or continues to be treated as a privilege reserved only for those who can afford market-rate prices. This crisis isn't happening somewhere else. It's happening right now to people who used to live normal lives just like yours. If this story affected you, we want you to tell us in the comments what shocked you the most. And in the next video, we're exposing how this crisis is spreading to other cities and why millions could be next. You don't want to miss it.